What have you witnessed someone do that made you realize he/she is really, really smart? My wife's grandfather. He's a retired electrical engineer with a dozen patents to his name, and a long list of recognitions I can't be bothered to remember or name. I always knew he was brilliant, but never realized just how, until one day last year we were visiting and he got a phone call. Keep in mind he's been retired for 20 years and is 86 years old. The phone call was from an electrical engineering firm from halfway across the globe asking if they could fly him out to a site and have him consult on the energy capture of a hydroelectric dam they were building. They'd run into a problem that none of them, all electrical engineers, could solve. They had consulted 3 of the top related university departments in the US on the issue, and the last one had referred them to him. 20 minutes on the phone, and he agreed to think about it. 2 days later he had solved their issue, and written the solution on a single 8x11 sheet of paper, which he scanned and emailed to the company. He said he took so long to write it up because he didn't want to have to fly all the way there at his age. His explanation was so clear I was able to understand and follow it with no relevant higher education. I spent a year trying to track down an intermittent issue on my car. An older gentleman on the forum had suggested a likely cause, but I disregarded it as the parts had been replaced. Sure enough, he was right, and I managed to follow from that to find the other half of the problem. Saved me so much trouble. I'd had a mechanic look at it, I'd spent hours tearing my hair out trying to fix it, nothing worked prior to that. Respect your elders, folks. One time my drunk uncle was in jail and needed bail money, and being that my dad was the only one in the family with any real savings, they all looked to him to fork up 100% the cash. Having been asked, he realized this situation had 2 possible outcomes. Pay for his bail and never get the money back. Not pay for the bail and the whole family blame him for it. So, my dad decided to throw them a curveball. He told them that whatever the rest of the family raised for the bail, he'll not only match it, he'll offer double whatever they raised together. Nobody offered 1 cent. Blame averted. Edit, I'm quite amused by the shared laughter from everyone. I'm going to tell my dad about this later. He'll think it's hilarious too. Card game. You split the deck between everyone face down. And then everyone takes a turn flipping the top card and putting it in the center pile face up. If 2 consecutive cards have the same number, you can slap the deck to take all the cards. Some people also allow slapping for sandwiches, 2 cards with the same number separated by 1 card. Face cards have special rules that burn the next player's deck. First person to get all the cards wins. You can slap back in if you lose your deck. Edit, some people have pointed out that they know the game is Snap, but I'm pretty sure they're wrong because there's literally no way a popular, simple card game could have more than 1 name. There can be only one. That may be the most concise synopsis of ERS I've ever seen. For comparison, I really would love to see more concise explanations of card games. Every time someone asks me to play one I'm unfamiliar with, it's accompanied by an overwhelming trip to Google and Wikipedia. I'm fairly certain the rules to most games are more simple than they look. Older brother always was terrible at school. I can remember him straight up asking why he needed to graduate high school and then again in college. He then accepted a low-level job after graduation in marketing that ultimately fell apart due to the company executives screwing up big time. During all of it he somehow was able to keep a small client and within 7 months of working was promoted to their executive marketing director, making 6 figures. Now he has multiple clients on the side and is always scheming something up. Dude is as hard-headed as they come but nonetheless a damn marketing genius. Blows my mind how far he has come. I was once in Chinatown and I saw this old Chinese guy with a bunch of groceries. He had tied the bags together by the handle and slung them over his shoulder. He looked ridiculous. The next week I was struggling with a lot of groceries and I remembered the old Chinese guy, stopped on the sidewalk, tied all my bags together, and walked home like the unencumbered dork I became that day. Can I get a MS Paint diagram of what you mean / how to tie them? Not a person, but my parents' old dog. My mom would get bones from the butcher shop for their dog. They were long enough that the dog couldn't get all the marrow out of the center. The dog figured out that only my stepdad's truck was heavy enough to break them after experimenting with the other vehicles at the house. There was usually a bone in the same spot on the driveway every time I went home. Reminds me of crows dropping nuts on crosswalks. Or the guy who created a machine that would dispense a peanut when a coin was put in and trained the crows to do so. The crows left and brought him a shit ton of loose change. When I was a kid, my mother would go into the garden and there would always be a bunch of empty pea pods on the plants. The pods would be open and empty without any chew marks. This frustrated my mother because she couldn't figure out how this was happening. No one in the family was doing it because we just picked the pods off, and deer will just eat the pods right off the plant. One day when I was raiding our garden, I saw our blue heeler slit open a pea pod along the seam with a canine tooth, then lick the peas out. She had always been a smart dog and picked up on any tricks of voice commands we would come up with as kids without any real training, but opening the pea pods was what made me actually realize how smart she was. In high school, I had a friend who we made fun of all the time for being dumb, but he would have the wackiest ideas that would somehow work. One time, around Christmas of my sophomore year, a few of us decided to buy a 30-pack, and then later decided we didn't feel like drinking it that night. I couldn't keep it at my house, but one of my friend's parents was coming to pick all my buddies up. Nobody knew how they were going to get the 30 out of my house and to one of their houses. Then my friend came up with the genius idea. He went upstairs in my house and wrapped the 30 in wrapping paper. He then proceeded to carry it right out to the car with our friend's mom waiting and say it was a gift for his girlfriend who he was going to be seeing later that night. I realized that not being great at school doesn't mean someone isn't ingenious. I knew two guys in undergraduate who would play mental chess. As they'd passed in the hall, one guy would say, "Knight to queen 3, or whatever." The other guy would roll back his eyes for a second and then nod to acknowledge the move. Both guys then kept walking, in opposite directions. Later that day, when they passed again, the second guy would declare his counter move. A game could last days and they never forgot where any of the pieces were. Each had a mental image of the board. Sure, they might have been faking, but these guys were always first and second on the dean's honor list, for all 4 years of my undergraduate. I knew them pretty well. I think the mental chess was legit. Most really good players can do this. Once someone becomes familiar enough with the game, it becomes a lot easier to recognize patterns. Of course, intelligence is required advantageous to get good at chess. Sitting in a best friend's apartment on the East Coast in the mid-1980s. He's working on some code on a prototype Unix workstation MIPS had given him. He runs his program, and it produces an answer. Then runs it again and produces a different answer. Thinks about it for a minute and pronounces, "The CPU is broken." Right. The CPU is broken. Never heard that one before. Has it occurred to you that? Yes, it had occurred to him. Went through 3 or 4 scenarios. Then he pulled out the machine-level debugger and started stepping through the code. Look, right here. The flags weren't updated right in this instruction. Yeah. Whatever. Sends email, on the brand new internet, to MIPS. Gets a response the next day. "Oh, you have that CPU. We have verified your issue. We will put a replacement in the mail promptly." His CPU was broken. 30 minutes from diagnosis to request to repair. So, the problem with explaining this is that there's like 4 layers of abstraction between that guy and his CPU already, much his thought process, and much less to trying to explain it over the internet. This is like, get a computer engineering degree to even understand the problem, then read the 30,000-page thesis the dude wrote about how he figured out the problem, level of crazy smart. The Eli 5 on this is going to be that he knew exactly what the code did, understood exactly how the compiler worked and what machine code came out the other end, and understood the entirety of the CPU's architecture. He ran through all of that process in his head, and figured out exactly what would have to go wrong to give him the behavior he was seeing, and that error was part of the CPU's responsibility. What I'm saying, really, is that the dude in the story isn't smart, the dude in the story is the CPU whisperer. If you gave him a bowl of sand and copper, he could hand you a working replica of that CPU 30 minutes later.